family. Welcome to JFK Today, your direct link to all things politics, comedy, and culture. I'm your host, Janaya Future Khan, champ yapper and frequent nuisance in the activist and comedy worlds. Let's get dialed in. So it's too damn hot. I crawled out of my home in the night like a roach because it's too damn hot. So we'll get into that. Some of the best takes from presidential burns in debates. Shout out to our upcoming debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And then the other Palestine, the West Bank. So here's our quick hits. I did mention it. I do need to complain about how hot it is and how hot I am. I feel I am so dry. I'm ashy inside. I'm spiritually ashy. I'm psychologically ashy. If I sneezed, I would spontaneously combust. I'm not designed for this kind of heat. I am a preemie. Okay, I get heat hives. If the bell tolled for revolution today, I would get up on that stage and people would be expecting light-skinned, tiny, gender-ambiguous Angela Davis, and instead they'd get heat-hived, Raggedy Andy, because that's who I am and that's what I feel like. It's not cute. I'm not here for this. I'm upset. For those of you in LA or going through your own little heat wave, just make sure you're drinking water and electrolytes will save the day. And keep your sun exposure to a minimum. I know I'm just stating the facts, but I'm upset. I'm very upset. Anyway, K-Dot's in the news. There is one place I know in Los Angeles that's burning hotter than our neighborhoods and our streets, and that is the inside of Drake. He is so upset because they just announced today that Kendrick Lamar would be doing the halftime show next year at the Super Bowl. Now millions of people around the world can also hear Kendrick Lamar call Drake a pedophile. I don't even know how you come back for that. Anyway. Elections updates were 62 days out. We have a huge debate on Tuesday. In the meantime, Liz Cheney endorses Harris. I think perhaps at a different time it would have been pretty sizable. It's like, okay, it's fine. It's fine. But in the meantime, right, we've seen this blue wave, the joy, the Kamala Harris of it all. Where are they? What are the polls saying? We know that Trump and Kamala Harris are actually neck and neck. This is based on the Siena poll. One of the only ones that I'm inclined to pay a little bit of attention to because we all know it is a flawed system, but that one does tend to be a little bit more accurate. So let me catch you up to speed. We have 7 battle states to be paying attention to. That's Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. So when they're looking at these polls, they're paying attention specifically to how each candidate fares. And overall, they are neck and neck. This is what some of the voters had to say, though. More than on the Siena poll, right? So this is beyond just where Trump and Kamala Harris are. It says more than 60% of likely voters said the next president should represent a major change from Biden. But only 25% said the VP, that's Kamala Harris, represented that change, while 53% said that Trump did. First, I was going to get really annoyed because I'm like, are we talking about MAGA losers or these? But then I was reading some of the comments. There was one guy who's like a plumber, and he said that how can Kamala Harris be different from Biden when she was his vice president? So that made me realize, I think, even though I read and I try to think and I'm like, be a flexible brained person, it's really challenging to not just assume that it's just this population of people that believes in Donald Trump, for whom racism was not a deal breaker and is not a deal breaker and fascism is not a deal breaker. I think it's really easy to think in those terms. But when I read that quote, it was such a reminder that there are normies in this. The internet, despite the fact that I sit here and I read everything and I criticize what I'm seeing and I'm a critical thinker, I try to be, and all that stuff, I can very easily fall into these lazy, well, they're just this. And actually, this guy is saying something profound. How is she different? Bitch, you got to tell us. You got to tell us how you are different. How are you different from the other bitch that's running? Because we need to know. How are you different from the bitch that is in power? This is such an important moment for Kamala Harris to set herself apart from everybody else. Not just Donald Trump, but from Biden, because that's the weight, that's the anchor that might drag her down. I mean, there are limits to this. The thing that I'm hopeful for beyond the obvious is that her fundraising, Kamala Harris's fundraising, is still just eons higher than Donald Trump is right now. And what a great opportunity for you to put those dollars, get some bang for the buck, and put out some ads that show that you are different. Communicate to us differently on Israel. Take a different stance. Separate yourself. Arms embargo, sanctions, limit spending, whatever it is, do something, because that is the key issue that's hugely important to American voters beyond economics. But what you're hearing in that moment, and what we keep hearing over and over again, and it sucks because I think the racists tend to hijack the feeling, is that things can't possibly keep going on as they are. There is a general feeling and ethos around this moment. But unfortunately, racists, bigots, losers, they seize the conversation and turn it into something else. And while we may have our own takes about what it means to say you want something new and then put a billionaire in power, the truth is the Democratic Party is simply not doing a good enough job demonstrating that difference. In fact, they're promising us the same. And so when lefties criticize it, sameness, it makes a lot of sense. And when we look at how much of that sameness today came because people lived, fought for, and died for change, that still is being rolled back, that still doesn't encompass the most marginalized. We know we've got a ways to go. So we've got a little over 8 weeks, right? This is the shortest presidential election in modern American history. And both candidates have very little opportunity to shift the electorate, right? But while Trump is fixed, I mean, God, look at him trying to come up with something new against Kamala Harris. It's every time I look at Donald Trump, I think of Abe Simpson, you know, Homer Simpson's father, when there's a newspaper article where he looks up at the sky and he's got a fist raised and he's like, man angry at sky being blue. And I'm just like, that's Donald Trump. He's a one-trick pony. He's got no game. He's got no game. But Kamala Harris is still largely unknown to the populace. They don't know what she thinks. They don't know what she believes. And yeah, the DNC was a good opportunity for her to stake a claim, but it was largely to people who were already going to vote for her. In order to get the shifts that you need, you've got to come out and show yourself as different. And honestly, the presidential debate might be one of the best places for it. So I decided, right, in honor of the presidential debate being tomorrow evening, I was like, what are the best presidential burns that have ever happened in American history? I'm just so curious. I know there's a couple burns on the debate stage, but just generally, what have presidents said about other people, whether it's their nemesis, whether it's senators, whatever. So here's my list, my top 10 list of presidential burns and insults. Okay, here we go. Abe Lincoln in 1862. He said that of General McClellan, no. You know what? This one's better. I'm going to try to stick to one per one. The Abraham Lincoln on Stephen Douglas's policy on slavery. This is what he said. It is as thin as the homeopathic soup that was made by boiling the shadow of a pigeon that had been starved to death. I'm sorry, that's actually pretty incredible. This is the other one he said, though. You know, I brought it up, so I got to name it. So in 1862, Abraham Lincoln, he was disappointed by the slow progress of the Union Army, so he sacked General George McClellan in November of that year, and he said, if you don't want to use the army, I should like to borrow it for a while. That's kind of gangster, I got to just say. That's kind of gangster. And of another general, he said he's got his headquarters where his hindquarters ought to be. I mean, I'm here for the wordplay. It doesn't slap as much, but I'm like, as thin as the homeopathic soup that was made by boiling the shadow of a pigeon that had been starved to death. It's a pretty good burn, I gotta say. Okay, Theodore Roosevelt called William J. Long too small game to shoot twice. So the man liked to shoot, he liked to hunt or whatever, and he's saying that he's not somebody you should ever look at twice. It took me a second, but I was like, is that the best burn that he could give? Is it? So I looked more onto Theodore Roosevelt, and he said this on William McKinley. McKinley had no more backbone than a chocolate eclair. That's a burn. Okay, no more backbone than a chocolate eclair. Kamala Harris, please take notes. All right, We've got some bangers for the stage for you. This is the time for you to win over the populace after you separate yourself from Gaza, from Israel and its war on Gaza and its war on Palestinians. He then went on, Theodore Roosevelt went on to call President Woodrow Wilson a Byzantine logothete backed by flub-dubs and mollycoddles. I had to look all of this up. But basically, a logothete is like a general of the Byzantine times. I better be saying that right. It's one of those words that I've read before and not said out loud, and I have a very bad track record of saying those words out loud. But anyway, flub-dubs are just yes men, and mollycoddles are just people, it sounds like what it sounds like. You're just surrounded by a bunch of yes men and coddlers. It's more fun to say than the actual slap. Anyway, this is what Harry Truman had to say about some general in 1952. The general doesn't know any more about politics than a pig knows about Sunday. I just thought that was funny. And then Truman also denounced Nixon as a no-good lying bastard and told the crowd that anyone who votes for him ought to go to hell. Another great line that Kamala Harris can borrow. This is what Ronald Reagan in 1984 said about his Democratic opponent, Walter Mondale, who was younger than him. This is key. Mondale was much younger and then questioned whether or not Reagan had the stamina. And then the debate moderators asked, and then Reagan said, "I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience." I'm not going to lie, that's a good burn. Everybody laughed, including Walter Mondale, who also lost. I'm like, way to celebrate your own downfall, sir. Don't give it up to the Republicans for nothing. Anyway, Lyndon B. Johnson said on Gerald Ford, "Jerry Ford is so dumb that he can't fart and chew gum at the same time." Another great banger of a line. Come on. Actually, you know what? I think that I think this is a shorter list than 10 because I pushed them all in together, but it doesn't matter. I think it's like 7 or 8. Anyway, in the vice presidential debate, so I did have to pull out this banger on the VP stage, Bush's running mate, Dan Quayle, compared himself with John F. Kennedy. So this guy says, I'm like JFK. The Democratic Senator, Lloyd Benston, shot back, "Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy." Talk about the power of repetition. That is a burn. I got to give that's a burn. He was not mollycoddled. In 2020, Trump, who was the then incumbent, debated Joe Biden in his characteristically testy way that was full of interruptions. And at one point, this is my favorite moment of Joe Biden on a debate stage, Biden said, "Will you shut up, man?" Perfect line. Perfectly delivered. Kamala Harris has a good one. "I'm talking." That was great. She delivered it in a very black way. A very black way. Very black. It was very black. The blacks talk like that. She did a good job with that one, actually. That one was gangster. But one of my personal favorites, and I'm going to give you a bit of context, was in 2011, right? Sarkozy was dealing, Obama then was dealing with like France and everything. Sarkozy says about Netanyahu, "I can't stand him. He's a liar." He's talking about the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. And, Obama had a series of run-ins with Netanyahu where they just did not agree. I'd love to say that led to major shifts and changes. It really didn't. But he interacted with him on multiple fronts for the Iran nuclear deal and, honestly, for a time, putting a moratorium on the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And so this is what Obama said when Sarkozy said that. "You're tired of him. What about me? I have to deal with him every day." That one's okay. I really put that one last because it's a punch-up or it either primes us for the West Bank conversation and the expansion of settlements in Palestine. "You're tired of him. I have to deal with him every day." I'm trying to make it slap more. It doesn't. We just got to let Obama go on that one. That wasn't the best one. I was like, well, those settlements really, I'm like, no, they kept expanding. So I don't know. Anyway, a lot of attention, and it is much needed, and it's just not enough, has been paid on Gaza because Gaza encompasses so much of what Israeli apartheid, the evils of it, the horrors of it, the unendingness of it. It is the fever dream of evil. And while we need to constantly pay attention to what is happening in Gaza, right? Because I can tell you, for example, an Israeli airstrike early on Sunday killed 5 people, including 2 women and 2 children, and a senior official, right? Just happened, right? Since October 7th, there have been more than 1,000 incidents of settler violence, which we're going to be talking a little bit about, and also the expelling of at least 1,300 Palestinians from their homes. Now, keep in mind that this is outside of Gaza and that these numbers are less than what is actually true. We're not getting the best count because of the way the apparatus is set up. So when we think of Gaza, we also have to think of Jenin, we have to think of the West Bank, we have to think of, which is occupied, we have to think of all of Palestine, because Israel's military has persistently and increasingly been unsparing in its tactics. So while it's maneuvered all of Gaza into this the equivalent of an open air prison, a lot of how it sharpens and hones its military tactics is in the West Bank. So since October 7th, which is again the inciting time for a lot of people, over 700 Palestinians have been killed, right? So that's the highest in the last 15 years. So, when you think of it, that's 680 Palestinians at least. It's 157 children have been killed in the West Bank and East Jerusalem since Israel launched its war in Gaza in response to October 7th. I have been trying to find language to articulate what it felt like to actually be there and experience it myself. So in 2016, I was in East Jerusalem and I met families, some of whom had just been expelled. And so it looks like this. You can just go to the grocery store. You got to go to the grocery store. And then when you come back, everything you own is on the street. A new family has moved in, a Jewish family, an Israeli family, and they have IDF protection with them 24/7. They now legally own that house. There is no legal recourse you can take. There's no illegal recourse you can take. Your house is gone. They will wait for you to leave your home. And in the event that there is an elderly person in your house or an infant or anything else, they have no issues violently removing those people or even killing them. And it's not uncommon. This was long before October 7th, right? It's been an expansion project, and settlers, I think we talk a lot about the Israeli military and this, the IDF and the Israeli military and Benjamin Netanyahu, but what I saw that scared me more, to be perfectly honest with you, was the ways in which settlers moved. So I met some of those settlers who moved back and forth across from the West Bank, and also just some who harassed the folks that I was with because we were black, and understood that we were likely part of this delegation, and so just went above and beyond to flash their weapons at us, to harass us, to yell at us. The IDF was there and had no problem with what was going on. They were threatening to shoot us, threatening to kill us, and this was me who, in Palestine, I have this passport. I can leave. I can move around. I have a Canadian passport. The Palestinian man who was born and raised in East Jerusalem, who lives in the States, who is a lawyer and a legal expert, right? He had to fly in through Jordan. He was not allowed to fly in through Israel. He was not allowed to fly into his own home. This is one of those things where we need to be much more flexible when it comes to our understandings of privileges, which is why I dislike that concept so much, because it is so situational, so contextual, right? So many layers. And I've not been able to shake or even articulate well what I saw from my time there. It was horrendous. The settler project is not some offshoot. They can actually work more violently and with more legal impunity than the IDF itself. So let me just tell you what settler violence has looked like in the past 2 months. A group of off-duty reservists from a settlement, right, settlers, shot and killed a Palestinian resident of East Jerusalem. Settlers attacked Palestinians, foreigners, and Israelis in the village of Kusra. Settlers shot a Palestinian and threw stones at a pizzeria in Hawara. They burned fields and threw stones in the village of Rujib, attacked Palestinians with batons in the village of Susia, threw stones and burned the car of 4 Bedouin Israeli women and a baby in the settlement of Givat Ronan, and rampaged through the village of Jit, shooting a Palestinian until they were dead. There is no limits to their violence, and they will abuse other Jewish people, other Israelis, if it means seeing through their agenda, right? These are the folks who protested for the right to rape Palestinian prisoners and were willing to push through the IDF to do so. Health Minister Majid Abu Ramadan said, "No place in Palestine is safe, not just Gaza." He says, "We witnessed the occupying enemy repeating the systematic destruction I saw before, targeting both human life and infrastructure. When they can't kill, when settlers cannot kill for whatever reason, they will destroy every building, every home, every market that they come across." This is a population of people that are not the Israelis that are out there fighting against Netanyahu. These are the folks. Remember I mentioned in a previous episode that Netanyahu had some people in his cabinet who were significantly more far right than him, and he's there. He's like on the right. He's right of right. These are the folks that enable and empower the settlers that seek to wreak havoc on regular, everyday Palestinian people just living their lives. So one of these people is Itamar Ben-Gvir. He is the right-wing minister of national security. He's one of the absolute worst. He presides over the national police force and is particularly supportive of the settler movement. And his subordinates seem to understand this, according to both the AP News, New York Times, The Atlantic. His subordinates seem to understand, even when not given direct instructions, that, and his subordinates being, police officers, the IDF, whatever, that they are not to stand in the way of rampaging settlers. Settler colonialism in Israel, particularly on the West Bank, has gotten so bad that foreign countries believe it's too much. So since the beginning of the year, this year, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Canada, the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan have placed financial sanctions on individual settlers, as well as particular outposts and right-wing organizations, right? This is important. It means that on some level, these reports that are coming out from human rights entities, human rights groups, watchdogs, settler watchdogs, et cetera, are at least being heard by some people. But to be honest with you, they do very little to hamper the abilities of those sanctioned individuals to carry on with their regular violent activities. It's one of those moments where when you think to yourself, humankind is beyond redeemable, you look at the fact that actually there are people who would stop this in an instant if they could. It's simply that the powers that be stop them. There are everyday people who are fighting against this, but there are more powerful entities that stop them. So I looked into these sanctions, right? One person in particular, and this was from, I believe, The Atlantic. No, I got this from the AP News. So for weeks after being sanctioned by the U.S., someone named Yinon Levy, he struggled to pay the bills, right? He's living on his farming outpost on top of a hill in the occupied West Bank. But they say that for the Israeli settler, this particular individual, these problems did not last for very long. So while the banks froze his accounts, his community, that's the settler community, that's Ben-Gvir, everywhere in between. His community raised thousands of dollars for him, and Israel's finance minister vowed to intervene on sanctioned settlers' behalf. 2 months after the sanctions were issued, Levi was granted access to his money. This is what he had to say. He's 31 years old, and he told the Associated Press, "From his farm in South Hebron Hills, America thought it would weaken us, and in the end, they made us stronger." So the sanctions, rather than, actually stop it, emboldened settler attacks and land grabs to escalate. That's actually what it did. So, and that's according to Palestinians in the West Bank and local rights groups and sanctioned Israelis. So here's the thing. I've heard many people in talking about this say that some of whom are Zionists, some of whom are not, because, I'm in fights with everybody. That's me, you little light-skinned little Tasmanian devil fighting the good fight. I've heard people who are anti-Zionist who say that Israel, it's, I don't even know what the titles mean anymore, because there was a group of individuals who believed that they had a right to Israel, that it was their birthright, but didn't agree with the settler violence, but believed in the logic of it, believed that they had a right to those lands based on ancestry. And for one, I stumped them the way I've stumped other people in the past, but rather than just debating them head on, I say, well, then are all displaced people entitled to nation states and nationhood? In which case, when Palestinians have the same position, when they have the same rights. The issue with that, though, of course, is that it kind of forces somebody to own either their own racism or their own belief in Jewish superiority. The cognitive dissonance was pretty breathtaking, because it means, like, first of all, let's just say, they say it's a bunch of small bad actors. It's not all settlers. Let's just be very clear that some of the world's and history's worst atrocities were done by a small handful of bad actors. And second of all, it's so much bigger than that, because the institution, the belief, the practice of settlership is inherently violent. It is an inherently violent belief system. It can't be, they're not bad guys. No. It is an inherently violent and evil belief system. And the way that it works is so much like the way that lies do, or the way that hatred does, or bigotry. It is extremism. It only moves in one direction, and that's towards more and more violence and more justification of those violences. And let me tell you something, settlers have become so organized and unhinged that they can't be controlled by the IDF anymore and by the Israeli government. They are actually saying that settlers now pose a security risk. Yeah, that's what happens. That's what happens when you enable a bunch of extremist groups that you help to arm and then allow to do whatever they want. Sound familiar? We might have this problem in America very soon. In fact, in some ways, we already do. It's funny how these systems keep replaying themselves, and they actually feed off of each other. Settler violence, like all kinds of colonial violence, like colonial violence itself, it stems from the belief in a racial and ethnic superiority, right? It's a racist ideology. That's all it is. It doesn't make a difference who the person holding the stick is, or what clothes they wear, or what gear they wear on their head, or what God they pray to. It's the same violent system. And it just, the exceptionalism here, the idea that, and I grapple with it here, I grapple with it all over the place, this idea that there is some sort of unique experience of oppression. There's a unique history of pain for certain individuals, that because this happened to Jewish people for centuries, the ends justify the means. And I'm like, I'm sorry, that's just simply not true. It doesn't. And the idea that that's the conclusion that could be drawn makes me sad, because all you've done is repeat the violence of the past, and you're willing to, honestly, like, let's say I bought into the whole logic. I'm like, now we should just kill Jewish people who don't agree with our Jewish beliefs? What the fuck are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. It is an inherently violent institution. So look, a little brief moment for history. Israel seized the West Bank, Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip in the 1967 Mideast War. Again, very, very one-sided. But that's from 48. So from 48, all these governments, none of whom are Palestinians and not have a say, they decide, okay, well, this part's Israel, this part's Gaza, this part is Palestine. Israel has continuously stretched and grown. And since then, some 500,000 Israelis have settled in the West Bank. The international community and international rights, international watchdogs all believe and all say that these communities are largely illegal. They shouldn't exist. But under Netanyahu's coalition, the most right-wing in Israeli history, with settlers themselves in key positions. Yeah, settlers themselves in key positions. The expansions have been turbocharged. They've used October 7th as means to justify rapacious, cruel, evil expansion. So Palestinians are saying that expanding Israeli outposts are shrinking their access to land, and settler violence against them has soared since October 7th. These land seizures have been through unauthorized outposts and have more than doubled. So, and this is according to the settlement watchdog Karim Navat. I bring this all up to say, I need you to see how sophisticated this system of apartheid is and how few recourses we actually have. But I'm very clear that we have to fight anyway. I'm very, very clear on that. The more that we shed light on this, I'm going to tell you something. Those sanctions happened for a reason. And they didn't have the effect, but it means that there are people that are trying to make a change, and our job is to find those people and to help them. Right now, we have an opening with Kamala Harris. We'll see where she is on this debate stage. But this is a good time for all the organizers and all the activists and all the artists to think about what your next big move is. We have just under 8 weeks. We have just under 8 weeks to do some serious damage. And you know what? My ass is getting on social media. That's what I like properly. You have my promise. It's go time. It's go time. I am furious. I'm disgusted, but I am very aware of how this thing enables itself. And right now, Israel's about to find out just how dangerous it is when you let people get away with any and everything, when racism becomes the seat in power, when ethnic cleansing and genocide become the vehicles through which a country is realized, and what that means in terms of legacy, in terms of safety and sustainability. I'll answer, it's not. It's not any of those things. Netanyahu is a coward and a cruel individual, and I look forward to his downfall. So, while we wait for that and push for that, why don't we push our Howard girl in the right direction? Because, well, if not now, then when? Let's fucking go. With that, why don't we hit the VMs for the question of the day?
Hello, Janaya. My name is Lynn. I'm calling from Toronto. Before I ask my question, I just want to say that I heard you speak for the first time, possibly 2016, and I agreed with everything you had to say. And then from 2020, in June of 2020, with the first Sunday sermon, until today, I agree with 99.9% of things you have to say. It's like you put into words my thoughts, my feelings around issues, and I just think you're wonderful, and I'm very grateful to be on this journey with you from afar. I guess my question to you is, why do you say whore like it's a bad thing? And for that matter, why do you say hoe like it's a bad thing? Let me know. Get back to me. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for those very, very kind words. I guess I got to get you on that point, that 0.001%, because I am a perfectionist. I'm on this journey with you too, to be honest with you. And I think that's a great question. You know, I saw in the email too, you said, I hope, you mentioned that whether or not you're being overly sensitive, and you're not. You're not being sensitive at all. You are filtering information and language through your sensibilities, right? And you have your sensibilities and I have my sensibilities. And when we put those things together, right? When we come together with our sensibilities, then we start to make sense. So I am here for it, right? And here's the thing. First and foremost, we're all hoes under capitalism. That's just, I'm out here hoeing for justice, whoring for justice, whatever you want to say, however you want to say it. So if I framed it as if it was negative, because I've been using hoes, whores, bitches, etc., in a very gender neutral way, but if I'm using it more skewed towards a specific subset, then I want to look at that because, well, first of all, those words are just so funny. These are my comedic sensibilities. They're hilarious words. But part of the reason why I love them now is because they were used exclusively against women while I was growing up, particularly, I mean, if you remember the 2000s, how they treated female pop stars at that time, it was pretty fucking gross. And there's been a shift in language just generally. I think about fag, faggot, etc., which is another word that I use. And queer, that's another word. Like, these are words that I think the right wing and conservatives and really religious-based theocrats kind of positioned as negative and derogatory, whatever. And, to me, it's all about context. I think those words are fun. So when I'm talking about the hoes who are bigots and whatever, then they're hoes for different reasons, I'm an equal opportunity hater and an equal opportunity lover. But I'm very grateful for this nudge, because if I am not communicating the words the way that, with some balance, I want to pay special attention to that, because we all hose for something, and yeah, I thought I was using it in a balanced way, but I want to be on the ball with that. So thank you. I also just want to mention, because what are your thoughts on this, Lynn? So I called J.K. Rowling a porch, and then somebody wrote in the comments, right? Well, how can you say that? You're making fun of women too. You're no better than J.K. Rowling. And then I said, well, you see, I've never cared about women at all. And everybody knew, like, it was funny because it's ironic, because it's not true. Is that funny to you? I want to know, because there's a difference. That person was not engaging in good faith, and you are engaging in good faith. And I'm just wondering, I wonder if it's the words themselves, the connotation, or the context. That's what I'm curious about. So if you ever feel inclined to, write back, I'm so curious to hear your thoughts on this. But for me, I love the push. I'll be more mindful, because hose is a wonderful word, and it's also a silly word, and everybody's a hoe. So from one hoe to another, unless you don't want to be that, in which case, H-dog, homie, whatever. Very grateful. And also just thanks for just kind of being steadfast. I'm so glad that, you've been on this journey with me since 2016. Listening to this little loser yap. So I'm just really appreciative of that. And thanks for sending that question. And also send more. I want them all. With that, I think it's a wrap. Thank y'all so much for listening in. It means the world for me, to me. This is a labor of love. You know that episodes are dropping 4 times a week. We're streaming everywhere that podcasts are. Don't forget to hit me up. I want to hear from you. Send me a voice note, question, or just thoughts. I'll take anything to jfktodaysshow@gmail.com. We're about to do a concerted push. Shout out to KR, Carolyn, and the JFK team, and shout out to you, the listeners, that make it all possible.